A biting wind cut through wool and skin. The snow was blind white, the air thin and cold as powdered steel. In a tiny canvas tent, 3 men huddled, frost building on their breath like frozen ghosts. Outside, the Antarctic night offered no mercy, just howling silence. Captain Robert Falcon Scott wrote in his journal, "We shall stick it out to the end, but we are naturally extremely disappointed." Those words would become both promise and prophecy. How did an explorer predict his own death, and then live long enough to write it? Keep watching. In 1910, Captain Robert Falcon Scott, a decorated Royal Navy officer, set out on one of the most ambitious polar missions in history. His goal, to be the first to reach the South Pole, the southernmost point on Earth, locked in perpetual ice, wind, and sub-zero darkness. Antarctica was not a place for the faint of heart. In scientific and naval circles alike, Scott was known for discipline, courage, and an unyielding belief in duty. His team, called the Terra Nova Expedition, launched from Wales with supplies, sled dogs, motor sledges, and scientific instruments. Beyond national pride, the mission was framed as a major scientific and geographical achievement, mapping uncharted land, studying weather, geology, magnetism, and biology. The journey was gargantuan. Snow and ice stretched like a frozen ocean, slopes like the walls of a white cathedral, with temperatures that plunged below -40 degrees. Browsing through field journals and supply logs preserved in the Royal Geographical Society archives, we know how meticulously Scott planned his route, ration calculations, and depot placements. Yet never in history had humans walked so far, so cold, with so little margin for error. Every step forward was a battle against physics, frostbite, exhaustion, crevasses hidden like death traps, and blizzards that could last for days. With every mile deeper into the Antarctic plateau, the journey became not just physical, but psychological. The team's morale, supplies, and the very machines they depended on were all being tested beyond known limits. Scott and his men were not just explorers. They were witnesses to one of Earth's harshest environments. The Terra Nova Expedition was not just about reaching a pole. It was a serious scientific mission. Scott brought specialists in geology, meteorology, zoology, and glaciology. Months before the final push to the pole, they conducted experiments that expanded our understanding of Antarctic weather patterns and ice formations. Their meteorological logs showed they recorded temperatures, wind speeds, and pressure changes never documented before. These measurements would later shape climate science. Scott says scientists also collected rock and fossil samples that helped confirm Antarctica was once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, a revelation crucial to the emerging theory of continental drift. Modern researchers still reference these records. The Antarctic collections at the Natural History Museum in London contained fossils and geological data from the expedition that continued to be studied in contemporary climate models. But the team's growing knowledge of the extreme cold also revealed its limits. The scientific data showed just how much human physiology and traditional equipment suffered below certain temperatures. Mechanical failures, frozen rations, and human frostbite were predictable consequences, and that knowledge would become tragically relevant later. Yet even armed with a new understanding of the polar climate, nothing could fully prepare them for the conditions they would face on the final stretch of their journey. In early 1912, Scott learned another team, led by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, was closing in on the same goal. Amundsen's party had taken a different route, using lighter sledges and a stronger reliance on dogs. Scott's team, slower and weighed down with scientific instruments, felt the pressure intensely. On January 17, 1912, Scott's team reached the South Pole, only to find Amundsen's flag already planted there. They had been beaten by weeks. That moment marked a turning point. The race for glory was over, but the race for survival had just begun. Turning back, Scott wrote in his diary about the crushing fatigue and dwindling supplies. The temperature plummeted even lower than before. Storms struck without warning, and the men began to suffer from exhaustion and severe frostbite. They struggled to reach the supply depots that were critical to their survival, only to find them understocked due to misplacements and miscalculations in the freezing, shifting terrain. Each day became a battle against time, wind, and gravity. The sledges creaked under stress, the men's fingers and toes blackened, ice clung to their faces, and every mile felt like miles closer to death. The tension was no longer about glory, it was about staying alive. By March 1912, the team was critically low on food and fuel. They knew any rescue was months away. It was in this desperate context that Captain Scott wrote some of his most harrowing journal entries. On March 29, 1912, at a makeshift camp just 11 miles from the next supply depot, Scott wrote, "We shall stick it out to the end. But we are naturally extremely disappointed." He noted the failure of their rations, the debilitating cold, and the impossibility of travel with frostbitten limbs. These entries were factual, first-hand accounts, not second-hand reporting. And they captured both the physical state of the men and Scott's chilling awareness that they would not survive. Modern analysis of the expedition's route, using GPS-based reconstructions and historic weather data, confirms the severity of the conditions they faced. Temperatures had reached some of the lowest ever recorded on the Antarctic plateau. Storm patterns were unusually intense, and the men were miles from critical supplies. By late March, Scott and his companions, Lawrence Oates, Edward Wilson, and Henry Bowers, were effectively trapped in the snow, powerless against the elements. They had predicted by the overwhelming weight of evidence and their own personal journal entries that their time was nearly over. And then those predictions came true. When a search party finally reached the frozen tent in November 1912, they found the bodies of Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, covered in snow, frozen where they had made their final camp. Lawrence Oates had walked out earlier into a blizzard to sacrifice himself for the others, a decision recorded in his own farewell note. The world reacted with shock, reverence, and intense debate. Newspapers hailed Scott as a heroic martyr. Scientific communities mourned the loss of the data he might have still collected, and families grieved an immense personal tragedy. Scott's final journals, retrieved and published, revealed not just physical suffering, but incredible emotional depth, hope mingled with despair, courage mixed with resignation, and candid reflections on mortality. Modern historians and psychologists have analyzed Scott's decisions. His pacing, his reliance on man-hauling instead of dogs, and his logistical planning. Some praise his leadership, others question his tactical choices. But no one disputes the raw authenticity of his own words as he described their plight and accepted their fate. His predictions of hardship and probable death were not mystical prophecies. They were documented, grounded assessments made by a seasoned explorer confronting overwhelming environmental forces. Thousands of miles away, people read his words with disbelief. A man who knew he was dying and wrote it all down. Sometimes the harshest truths are not found in legends or myths, but in the quiet, honest pages of a journal, where a man's final words meet the cold, hard edge of reality. Stay with us as the story continues. Robert Falcon Scott's final journey reshaped how the world viewed exploration, not as mere conquest, but as a confrontation with nature's absolute extremes. His records, preserved in museums and archives, informed future polar research about survival limits, weather patterns, and human endurance. Modern explorers and scientists study those same journals alongside satellite weather data to understand how conditions on Earth's poles affect our global climate systems. Scott's scientific contributions endure far beyond the tragedy of his death. The legacy is not a simple story of heroism or avoidable failure, but a powerful reminder that human ambition, when pitted against nature without a margin for error, can lead to both discovery and disaster. Scott did not die because he predicted his death. He recorded the harsh reality of it as it unfolded, and in doing so, he left behind crucial evidence for the world to learn from. In the end, his journey stands as both a cautionary tale and a tribute to human curiosity, a reminder that knowing the risks does not always keep us safe, but it can change how future generations understand the world. What would you have done in the face of that frozen wasteland? Push forward, return early, or rethink the entire mission? Was Scott's decision brave, tragic, or simply human? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story unsettled you or made you think differently about what it means to explore, let us know. And if you're curious about another real mystery from history that challenged human limits, we've got more coming on Untold Mystery. Stay curious, and thanks for watching.